What's up, everybody? It's Jason McLaren with This Show is a Disaster podcast. Today I'm talking about above ceiling compliance. And for those that don't know what that is, I'll talk about it. I'll explain a little bit more for you. But this is some projects I've been working on a lot lately involve above ceiling. And this can be connected to some other things, but I know I'll talk about that also. But I've been working on this lately with some projects, especially with coronavirus going on. And then I was listening to a podcast the other day and kind of got some stuff off of that podcast that I heard that was really interesting and kind of made it all click for me. So figured I would throw it out here today and let you know what's going on, or give you some tips and tricks. So above ceiling compliance is kind of what the facilities world looks at, is making sure all your stuff above the ceiling, above those ceiling tiles that you have in your building, in any kind of industrial or commercial setting, that make sure that all that equipment, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection is all installed correctly, basically, and that it's not hampering or impeding on any other of the other systems. So where this really comes into play is for compliance issues with anything that is regulated, such as fire protection, medical equipment, and some electrical and that sort of thing. For example, for electrical, if you know what a junction box is, that's where all the electrical comes together, and then it goes different directions for different circuits and that sort of thing. Well, part of the electrical code is that those have to be closed, right? So part of above ceiling compliance is making sure that all your junction boxes have covers on them. That's just a basic example. Then for fire protection, you don't want any equipment or air conditioning ducts or anything like that sitting on a fire sprinkler pipe, because it can make it slowly warp and bend and break loose couplings and that sort of thing. So this kind of stuff tends to get pushed by the wayside because you don't see it. People don't see this stuff every day. So it's not what we call quote unquote sexy. It's not something that's going to bring immediate value to your building. It's not going to, it's out of sight, out of mind. And so it usually doesn't get done until some kind of regulatory agency comes in and checks you or inspects what you're doing. And this is just one of those projects. As with any project, you just got to, as they say, eat the frog. I think it's a book or an old TED talk or something about eating the frog. Eat that frog, especially if it's like for your daily tasks. Do it first thing, get that thing you don't want to do out of the way, and then you can move on to other projects. So when you're looking at something like this, you want to start, as with any project, with small chunks or small task at one time. And so this podcast I was listening to the other day was talking about breaking down tasks, and the guy was talking about he took up crocheting because he wanted to learn a new skill, and he started making what they call granny squares. And these are, I guess they're typically 7 by 7 inches is a regular granny square, and then you use those to make blankets or quilts or whatever. So he wanted to be the Guinness World Record holder for granny squares. So he made the world record. I can't remember the size off my head, but he started off one at a time. He had started making small ones and then kind of went bigger and bigger and started, I guess there's crocheting clubs that wrap trees and that sort of thing. And anyway, so that kind of builds off of this. You got to start one square at a time, and it works great for drop-in ceilings because you literally have one square at a time in your ceiling. You have a ceiling grid. So you can take out a tile, look up there and see what's going on, and fix one tile at a time. That makes it easy for you to kind of break this down in different tasks, so you can delegate if you need to. If you're a director or leader in your department, you can delegate it to your main staff members and have them work on this in their downtime. And I know some of you are probably laughing now when I say facilities downtime, but we all have, those 1 or 2 hours a day or or days that maybe the building is closed, that you have to have staff there just for emergencies, that this is a good downtime or slow project. And I mentioned documentation. So the best way to do this would have if you could get a ceiling grid map that was put out during your construction. It usually has a map of the ceiling grid in there. Then your guys can follow along, or your staff can follow along and highlight or mark out the areas they've completed, so they're not being redundant. Now, where this really comes into focus is in industries like healthcare. I'm going to talk about healthcare and education because those are my two big areas that I'm the most familiar with, compliance type regulatory issues. So for healthcare, like I said, when you have an inspection, people are going to look for equipment on sprinkler pipes, open junction boxes, fireproofing or fire rated walls that are damaged. They're going to look for medical gas lines in your healthcare systems, making sure that they're labeled and marked. And this can all be inspected one ceiling grid at a time. And just think in an hour, if each grid only takes 5 or even 10 minutes, say 10 minutes at the most, you can do 6 grids or 6 squares in an hour. And if you're in a small facility, that means in not a long amount of time, you can knock out a pretty good chunk of your building. So there's, it's really something that just you got to get in there and start working on it and do that one square at a time. It's just like reading a book. If you crack open a book and you say you don't like to read, or you just can't find time to read, leave that book on your nightstand, and 5 minutes before bed, go in there and just read a word, read a sentence, and then maybe you'll get 1 or 2 pages done each night, and then you're done in a few days or a week or so. Education is the same thing, but it's not as much regulatory in education as far as the ceiling, as more as it could be a cost savings. And I'm about to get into why I'm mentioning cost savings, but usually when you build these academic buildings, they are inspected for occupancy, and they're inspected during the construction by the fire marshal. And then that ceiling grid goes in and nobody touches it until something's leaking or something's broken. So this can be a cost savings, because if you do this above ceiling program, you can get up there and check for things that are leaking before they become a major leak, especially in these older cast iron plumbing issues. They start to oxidize and rust. If you get up there and clean it up, pull all this Cat 5 cable that's been run over the years, move it out of the way, get it off the pipes that it's been laying on, and make sure that's not hiding leaks or anything like that. This can be a cost savings, not only on the plumbing side, but on the internet or data side, or any other utility you have run up there, because you can catch those issues before they start getting worse. Then going back to healthcare above ceiling, this can be a key performance indicator, or a KPI, and you can document this really well. Document how many grids you popped, how many things you had to correct. Make a chart with, okay, we corrected this many sprinkler issues, this many electrical box issues, that sort of thing. Put that all in a nice folder, and then when your accrediting agency comes in, you can show that to them as one of your KPIs if they ask for it, or even for your leadership team. It's going to be a good deal for that. And then also, it addresses all the same issues like I talked about with education, as far as finding things before they start leaking. And that kind of goes into business continuity. If you can find something before it leaks, especially in the water, water's probably the most damaging thing when it starts leaking. And so in these healthcare or even education buildings, if you have a flood, say a sewer pipe leaks from the second or third floor, well, now you've just flooded at least one floor, or basement, also 2 floors if you have a basement in your building. And anything in that area is going to be non-usable for a few days at least, maybe even more, depending on how long the leak is. So this is a business continuity tool also. if you're catching these sewer leaks before they get bad, those rooms will not go out of service, and you're able to get ahead of the curve there and get ahead of the game and mitigate that problem. So above ceiling, I know it's not the most enjoyable and most exciting topic, but like I said, I've been working on this the past couple weeks, and as you may have noticed, this episode kind of was out of the blue. I've been off air for a couple of weeks because I've been extremely busy. Coronavirus, I started this podcast when coronavirus started, kind of to get ahead of the game and answer questions that I was being asked. So now that coronavirus has kind of slowed down and my workload is picking up on the other end, and I have started a new degree program in school. I'm working on my doctorate. So my free time has been dwindled down. So this will be the final episode for This Show is a Disaster, the final episode. I will continue, if you've listened to my other podcast, Leadership Loading, and I'll continue that because that's part of my nonprofit organization, and I want to keep that going and give value to the stakeholders that we work with there. So that will still be going on if you want to listen to me on that podcast at leadershiploading.com. And then my YouTube channel will still be up. You can just search Jason McLaren on YouTube or go to the jasonmclaren.com page and get to it from there. And that's where I'll post stuff, random tips and tricks on there, rather than actually rolling out as a actual podcast episode. So thanks for everybody for listening. This has been a great podcast. We've had hundreds of listeners and thousands of downloads just over this short period of time during coronavirus, and hope it brought you some value. I'll leave the episodes up, so they'll be on all the podcast streams, and they'll be out there for you to reference if you need to. And that's all for now. Jason McLaren signing off.